Waiting for my suitcase at the arrivals hall at Jackson Airport the other evening, it occurred to me that the luggage carousel was a pretty good metaphor for Mississippi politics. Like suitcases on a carousel, many leaders simply sit on the conveyor belt of state politics, waiting their turn to get moved along to their next role. Too often leaders seem to be carried along by time and process, seldom ever bothering to outline a vision as to what it is they want our state to do differently. This explains why Mississippi conservatives have achieved less in 12 years than Arkansas, Louisiana, and Alabama have accomplished in the past 12 months. Louisiana didn't even have a Republican governor this time last year, yet they've already managed to pass universal school choice. Things could be about to change, however, if House Speaker Jason White gets his way. This week, Jason White announced that he'll be hosting what he calls a tax policy summit on September 24th to take a deep dive into the prospects for tax reform. My good friend Grover Norquist is going to be speaking, as will Governor Tate Reeves, as well as some of the leading conservative figures, I should say, from the House and indeed the state Senate. Having this kind of conversation out in the open really matters. And it matters because in the past, leadership in our state Senate has done what it can to head off tax cuts. Bringing the facts of what can and cannot be done out into the open like this makes it far harder for anyone to keep on finding new excuses to oppose doing actual conservative policy. Sunshine, they say, is the best disinfectant. It's certainly going to be a powerful disinfectant against the putrid politics of the backroom deal. We've seen far too many backroom deals used to kill off good conservative policy in Mississippi. Back in 2022, Mississippi passed a law to cut the state income tax to a flat 4%. This was a $525 million tax cut, driven forward by then Speaker Philip Gunn and Governor Tate Reeves. It benefited over 1 million taxpayers and their families. But we must never forget how some in the Senate fought against it. Not in the open, of course. Weak Senate leadership has a history of opposing conservative proposals in our state. Seldom do they have the courage to come out and explicitly kill off conservative measures. Instead, they do it on the sly. The Senate leadership maneuvered to kill an anti-diversity, equity and inclusion bill in 2024. I don't recall anyone coming out and explaining why they opposed anti-DEI law. They just killed it in committee with a nudge and a wink. For 3 years in a row, the Senate leadership has killed off attempts to restore Mississippi's so-called ballot initiative. Again, those against restoring the ballot initiative lack the courage to say they're against it. They killed that too, on the sly. Representative Rob Robertson's excellent school funding reform bill, perhaps the only big strategic achievement in this year's legislative session, passed despite attempts to scupper it by some in the Senate. And part of the backroom deal to get the bill passed was to actually change its name. Yep, things really were that egotistical and that petty. When Mississippi's weak Senate leadership wants to oppose an authentic conservative policy, they follow a very familiar pattern. A reason is cited as to why what's being proposed sadly can't be done. School choice, we were once told, would be unconstitutional in Mississippi. An anti-DEI law, it was implied, was unnecessary because there was no DEI on campus. Once that excuse is shown to be complete nonsense, there is indeed no constitutional bar to school choice. DEI is rampant on campus. Another excuse is then conjured up. And on it goes. Each time the Senate leadership opposes conservative policy this way, I wonder what their alternatives actually are. The answer all too often is that most of the time, they're not offering an alternative. It's pretty low grade to oppose ideas simply because they're not your own. That's not really leadership. Eventually, of course, a suitcase that sits on the carousel for too long ends up in lost luggage. A tragic end to a long and pointless journey, you might think. As a direct consequence of the 2022 Reeves-Gunn tax cuts, Mississippi is now starting to see a flood of inward investment coming into this state. Not a week passes without some new announcement. Every time you hear about a new factory opening in our state, remember who and what helped make it happen. I'm very optimistic that Jason White's tax summit could see further progress to make Mississippi super competitive.